Christina was absolutely stunning. She had this slightly upturned, cute little nose, big, glowing eyes that sparkled with life, and lips perfectly shaped with a confident curve. She held her head high, like she knew she was destined to be noticed. Her body was graceful, fluid, and slender, and oh, her legs were long, and the way she walked, like she was gliding on air. Christina's charm was irresistible. For the last 2 years of high school, boys practically formed packs to follow her around, desperate for her attention. "Chris, when are you planning to study for your exams?" her mom would ask, her voice laced with frustration, seeing her daughter spend countless hours glued to her laptop or flipping through glossy magazines. Other kids are locked in with tutors all day, cramming for the exams, and you just sit there browsing GQ. And by the way, that's a men's magazine. "Relax, Mom. Don't worry. I'll pass them. Trust me," Christina would respond casually, her eyes still fixed on her screen. Christina loved flipping through fashion magazines. They weren't just a pastime. They were her portal into the life she dreamed of. She'd pore over pages filled with celebrities, their clothes, their glamorous events, and picture herself among them. Successful, wealthy, and beautiful. To her, that's where she truly belonged. That's why she looked down on her peers, those who brought her pathetic bouquets of tulips picked from their neighbor's yard, with a slight air of superiority. Education? What for? When she was born to mingle in elite circles, Christina believed it was much more important to know how to dance, play music, or sing. Those were the skills that could come in handy at a fancy party or rubbing shoulders with high society people. She already had a good ear for music, and after a few lessons with a family friend who tutored her, she could play a couple of songs on the piano and belt out a few pop tunes. Her father, an excellent dancer, taught her to keep rhythm in almost any dance that might be useful in her future life, from ballroom waltz to salsa. Her parents were always on her case, telling her she needed to get serious and pursue a career if she wanted to make something of herself. But Christina had a knack for brushing off those conversations. She didn't see any sense in burying herself in the boring routine that her peers seemed to willingly embrace. "Sweetheart, we really need to talk," her dad said one day, sitting her down after another year had flown by since she graduated high school. "All your classmates are studying in college now, while you're just running around clubbing. I'm going to stop giving you money, and what are you going to do then? You need a profession to get by in this life." "Oh, come on, Dad. Why are you being so boring? I'm young. I'm enjoying life, and you're trying to shove me back into school. Let me take a break from all that studying." Christina snapped back, defiant. "Your break has gone on too long," her father shot back firmly. "At this rate, your life will pass you by, and you won't even notice it." Those 3 years after high school flew by in a blink for Christina. Youthful friends, wild parties, endless nights at clubs. But despite all the fun, she still hadn't found anyone who could open the door to the world of luxury and wealth she craved. Restaurants aren't exactly the ideal spot for meeting someone special. Christina knew that well enough. People go to places like this more for the food than for romance. She wasn't there alone, though. She had her girls with her, laughing, chatting, and having a good time, feeling safe in the company of friends. Things seemed to be going smoothly until the dancing started. One guy, who had clearly had way too much to drink, made his move on her. She turned him down, polite but firm. That didn't stop him, though. He kept pushing, and things were quickly starting to spiral out of control. Right then, as if on cue, a stranger entered the scene. He had been sitting alone at the table next to them, glancing occasionally in their direction but not really engaging until now. Seeing the situation escalate, he stood up with a sense of purpose, walked over, and gently, yet firmly, stepped between Christina and the drunk guy. His message was clear. This was over. With that, he casually extended his hand to Christina and asked her for a dance. There was something so effortless about it that she, slightly taken aback, accepted his invitation without hesitation. "Guess those dance lessons from Dad are finally paying off," Christina thought as she fell in step with the music. She moved with grace, her body responding instinctively to the rhythm, like she was born to dance. Christina was a natural when it came to playing up any situation, and this was no different. She gasped at the right moments, leaned in just enough to keep his attention, and fluttered her long lashes like she was casting a spell. Her moves became a bit more sensual as she lightly pressed her chest against him, raising the temperature just enough to keep him hooked. The guy's name was Tom, and he was exactly the type she'd been searching for. Confident, mature, and not too old but just experienced enough to know what he wanted. He wasn't one of those kids running around clueless. He had a certain calm, magnetic energy that drew her in. Christina wasn't one to let a good opportunity slip away. She played her cards perfectly. Within 3 months, she was already living in his apartment. Everything was falling into place. And 6 months in, naturally, she brought up the topic of marriage. Tom, she smiled softly, isn't it time we made this official? I mean, we love each other. What are we waiting for? Tom paused for a moment, his expression turning more serious. Christina, he began slowly, you've got to understand. I've been married before, and it didn't go well. I think we should give it a couple of years, see how we fit together. What? Christina couldn't hide her surprise. A couple of years? That's like half a lifetime. We love each other. What's the point of waiting? Still, he remained firm. We need time. Maybe I won't be the right fit for you. I'm older than you by 7 years. I've got my quirks, and not all of them are easy to live with. I've got quirks too, she shot back, her tone a little defiant. Everyone does. So what? Exactly, Tom said with a slight grin. Everyone's got their stuff, and we need to see if we can handle each other's. 2 years. Shortly after that conversation, Tom suddenly sent his housekeeper, Janet, on an extended vacation, telling Christina that he had fired her. Tom, Christina exclaimed the next day, genuinely annoyed. Why did you fire her? She could have kept things in order around here. It's not like it was a burden. You're calling her Janet now? Tom smirked. I thought you might get bored. You're not working, so I figured you'd need something to do. I would have found something, Christina mumbled under her breath, making sure he didn't hear. The truth was, Tom's decision to fire the housekeeper was far more practical than it seemed. He just wanted to see what Christina was made of when it came to handling the responsibilities of running a household. Just 2 days had passed since their last heated exchange when Christina and Tom found themselves in the middle of yet another intense conversation. It started off pretty casual, with a question that seemed innocent enough, but it didn't take long before things escalated. Hey, Chris. Tom's voice had a weird kind of seriousness to it. Do you honestly think takeout is like the ultimate dream for city folks these days? Like, this is the best we can do? Christina shot him a lazy glance, slightly narrowing her eyes. She wasn't a fan of the implied criticism in his words. And what if it is? She retorted, a hint of irritation creeping into her tone. Food's food. It's tasty and convenient. You just toss it in the microwave and boom, dinner's ready. Sorry, Tom sighed, closing his eyes for a second like he was trying to gather his thoughts. But I don't really like this stuff. It's not good. I'd prefer if you could cook something yourself. Please. Christina raised an eyebrow, already sensing where this was headed. There was no way she was backing down so easily. Tom, seriously? She smirked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. What century are we living in? The 21st. Why on earth does a woman in the 21st century have to stand by the stove like it's the 1900s? There's way more interesting stuff to do than cooking. Oh yeah. Tom shot back, leaning in a little closer like he was waiting for her to drop some profound wisdom. And what's this super important stuff that's keeping you from making dinner? Christina waved him off, clearly annoyed by the whole conversation. Who cares? Listen, we can just eat out at restaurants like normal people. You go there all the time, she reminded him, thinking back to the night they met. We met at a restaurant, remember? Tom chuckled, but there was something in his eyes that said he wasn't giving in. Let me clarify, he said, his voice cooler now. I'm not a big fan of restaurants, to be honest. And eating there every day? Way too expensive. As for that night we met, if you recall, I was there on business with a client, not just chilling like some people. Her eyes lit up, and she fired back, voice sharp with defiance. Whoa, watch it. Tom wasn't interested in making the situation worse, but wasn't about to let her off easy either. Look, just make dinner tomorrow, okay? Nothing fancy. Maybe just some fried meat? I'm not asking for a 5-star meal. Christina scoffed, clearly not happy with his request. But the next evening, much to her surprise, she decided to give it a shot. When Tom sat down to eat, he found a plate of meat that looked like it had gone through a war zone and barely survived. She had slapped the pieces onto a pan, fried them quickly, reheated them in the microwave, and tossed them onto his plate. The only thing on the table besides the meat was some sad-looking bread. Tom took a bite of the meat, chewed it slowly, and then mumbled without looking up. Did you find my old shoes or something? Christina blinked, not understanding what he was getting at. What the heck does that have to do with anything? She asked, clearly confused. Tom held back a laugh, but his eyes twinkled with amusement. Well, judging by how tough this meat is, I'm pretty sure you fried a shoe sole. Did you even taste this yourself? Christina sighed, unable to hide her irritation. Tom, I told you, I can't cook. I never could. He paused for a moment before asking, almost too calmly, and what about cleaning? Doing laundry? Washing dishes? Well, she began, her temper rising, yeah, I can do that stuff. Doesn't mean I like it. There are more interesting things to do. Tom didn't seem fazed. All right, how about this? I'll bring Janet back for a couple of months, and she'll teach you everything. Deal? Christina thought for a moment. She realized there was no point in arguing. Yeah, she muttered through clenched teeth, agreeing to the plan, remembering how her mom had spent years trying and failing to teach her all those household skills. Christina had a sinking feeling she wasn't going to get out of it this time. Christina had long realized one hard truth. Her dreams of a luxurious life with Tom were just that, dreams. No millions in the bank, no yachts, no lavish lifestyle she used to daydream about. Tom was living that simple, no-frills life, and when it came to money, he wasn't exactly swimming in it. She'd been with him at restaurants that looked like they could whip up a meal in 20 minutes flat. Basic, not gourmet. And Rolls-Royce? Yeah, right. She tried dropping hints about shopping sprees and fancy gifts, but Tom just laughed it off. And when he turned down her talk about marriage, she almost felt relieved. Good thing he didn't marry me, she thought to herself, lazily scrolling through her phone while lying on the couch. I'd be dealing with a messy divorce right about now. This way, I'm free. She flipped over, staring at the ceiling, feeling that itch for something bigger, something better. One day, as she was mindlessly scrolling through her social media feed, she came across an ad for a beauty pageant happening in New York. Bingo! She'd heard about events like this, rich and powerful guys scoping out potential wives. Of course, she wasn't about to compete. That was a little beneath her. But showing up in her best dress and on point? That was genius. The day of the pageant arrived, and Christina was feeling herself. She picked out the best dress from her closet, spent hours perfecting her makeup and hair. When she checked herself in the mirror, she saw the image of success, polished, flawless, and full of confidence. At the event, she scoped out the room, scanning the crowd for anyone who might catch her eye. The place was packed with people from all walks of life, but Christina had one target in mind: those with money, power, and a taste for luxury. Her eyes darted around like a predator on the hunt, sizing up a few potential prospects. During a break, when the contestants were backstage, a tall, buff guy approached her. His expression was all business, his vibe serious, almost secretive. "Someone wants to talk to you," he said in a low voice, as if this was some kind of big deal. "If you're interested, I'll take you over." Christina felt a surge of excitement. Hell yeah, she was interested. Everything was going exactly as she planned. A few minutes later, she found herself sitting across from a man who was clearly older than she'd expected. He had that mature, successful look about him, and his slight belly beneath the designer jacket screamed wealth and comfort. "I'm Louis Samuelson," he introduced himself, offering a firm handshake. His voice was deep, almost lazy, but there was authority behind it. "I run a coal mining business and, well, I don't have time for dating. But I saw you, and I'm interested." He handed her a newspaper, open to a page with his picture among some obviously important people. Louis was sitting there, looking right at home with the high rollers of the world. "I really like you, Christina," he said, his eyes locking onto hers. "I'm single, and I think it's time I changed that. Marriage isn't just some formality for me. It's a serious commitment. If you're up for it, we could get to know each other better." Christina didn't even need to think twice. She was barely paying attention to his words. Her eyes were glued to the photo, imagining the lifestyle that could be hers. They sealed the deal over an expensive dinner in an upscale restaurant. 2 days later, she was ready. Quietly packing her things, she moved around the apartment, making sure not to wake Tom. When he finally noticed what was going on, he just stood there, watching her get ready for her grand exit. "Tom," she began dramatically, pouring as much emotion into her voice as she could, "I've been wrong about you. You crushed my dreams, trapped me in this dull, routine life. Cleaning, cooking, never going anywhere. I can't live like this anymore. We've been stuck in this tiny apartment for 6 months, and I realize this just isn't for me." Tom listened quietly, his eyes steady on her face, as if he was trying to decode every word she said. "Chris, cut the drama, would you?" "I'm not following," he said, sighing. "What's your point?" "I'm leaving," she blurted out, defiant. "I found real love, and I'm done with this. Don't try to stop me. I've made up my mind." She had expected fireworks, maybe a huge fight, him begging her to stay. You know, like in the movies. But instead, Tom stayed calm. "Well, if you found someone, then I guess that's it," he said evenly, crossing his arms. "I'll call you a cab. Just tell me the address." Christina was stunned. His indifference threw her off completely. She had imagined him pleading for her to stay, trying to win her back, anything but this calm acceptance. But there he was, just standing there, not even fazed by her dramatic exit. His gaze had a touch of amusement in it, maybe even relief. Tom had seen this coming for a while. Her attempts at playing house had failed miserably. She wasn't interested in being a homemaker, didn't care for cooking or cleaning. Her so-called love was just an empty word. It was comfort and security she wanted, not the real deal. Tom had figured it out long ago. But now, with her making the first move, he only felt more certain about his decision. Christina gazed up at the dazzling Manhattan skyscraper, the lights reflecting her own swirling thoughts. She had barely been in this new life for a couple of weeks, but her head was already filled with dreams of luxury and glam. After all, Lewis Samuelson seemed like the guy who could give her everything she ever wanted. Fancy brands, upscale dinners, elite parties, and that high-status lifestyle she craved. She could already picture herself living it up in some penthouse, hosting exclusive parties with the city's finest. But when they entered the apartment, something felt off. "Lewis, is this your place or a hotel?" she asked, her voice hesitant as she took in the room. The vibe was cold, impersonal, like everything around her was temporary, not really hers. The furniture was basic, the walls were bare. It just didn't scream luxury the way she'd hoped. "It's rented," Lewis replied casually, as if it was no big deal. His tone didn't match her growing unease. "My place is getting remodeled. We'll move in 3 months." 3 months? That didn't sit right with her. She had envisioned herself in the lap of luxury, but here she was in a rented studio that felt more like a pit stop than the high-life mansion she imagined. Things got even weirder. Her new life took a strange, monotonous turn. Most days, she spent holed up in that Manhattan studio, staring out the windows at the city that seemed to be buzzing without her. Sure, at first, she was excited to hit up the boutiques and fancy restaurants, but every time she wanted to step out, Nicholas, the same bulky guy who'd approached her at the pageant, was there, shadowing her every move. He wasn't just security, he was her handler. He paid for her smaller purchases, but when it came to something expensive, he'd just give her this polite smile and wouldn't even reach for his wallet. Christina couldn't shake the feeling that she was stuck in some weird limbo, more of an accessory than a partner. She wanted gifts, attention, real affection, but instead, she got Nicholas, who hovered silently, a shadow in every room. And whenever she pushed for more from Lewis, there was this quiet, cold wall she couldn't get past. Even his silence spoke louder than words. Nights were spent with him, and even though his age showed sometimes, she couldn't deny that he was still physically capable. Yet as the days wore on, she started to feel more and more disconnected from herself. One night, she suggested they hit a nightclub, just to break the monotony. Lewis looked at her with that same cold, indifferent stare, and she instantly regretted even asking. He didn't yell or argue. His icy response was enough to kill any excitement she had. Weeks passed in the same dull cycle. Christina would lie on the couch, mindlessly flipping through channels on the giant TV, but nothing held her interest. She started to miss her old life, as plain as it was. She even missed Tom, who, though far from perfect, had at least been genuine. After 2.5 months, one morning, Lewis just vanished. Nicholas, as always calm and unfazed, walked in and simply announced, "Christina, pack up your things. Take everything." She stared at him in disbelief. Pack? Where? What was going on? "Where's Lewis?" she demanded, feeling a pit of panic forming in her stomach. "I'll explain downstairs. We're short on time." Her heart raced. Something was very wrong. She hurriedly gathered her things, her mind racing, but nothing made sense. When they got downstairs, Nicholas helped her with her bags, loading them into a car. But the whole scene felt surreal. "Goodbye, Christina. The driver will take you wherever you need to go." She stared at him, dumbfounded. "Wait, where's Lewis? What's happening?" Nicholas lowered his gaze slightly, as if to soften the blow. "Lewis flew back to his family." Her heart sank. "Family? What family? Flew where? What are you talking about?" Nicholas's voice was steady, but there was no sympathy in it. "To his wife. His 2 sons. They live abroad. Lewis comes here a few months a year for business. You didn't know?" Her world spun. All this time, He had lied? She had been nothing but a plaything. Something temporary? You really didn't see it coming? Nicholas added, with a touch of cold irony. In the bag, there's some money. You didn't seriously think you were anything more to him, did you? Christina's face flushed with shame and anger. Of course, she had started to suspect, but she pushed those thoughts away, clinging to the hope that things would get better. Now, everything she'd built up in her mind shattered in an instant. She wasn't anyone special, just another girl in the mix. And Louis, he didn't even bother to say goodbye in person. Nicholas, as if understanding her confusion, picked up her fallen bags, set them gently in the car, and shut the door with a finality that echoed through her. "Where to?" asked the driver, glancing at her through the rearview mirror. Christina stood by the car, nervously clutching the strap of her bag. "Where to?" the driver asked in a low voice, but her mind was stuck on one question. Where the hell could she go? Going back to her parents? No way. That would mean admitting failure and confirming their opinion that the life she had chosen was a dead end. She couldn't bear that humiliation. The only option left was Tom. Even though she had walked out on him, burned all the bridges, she now felt like he was the only lifeline she had. His address flashed in her mind, and before she could think it through, she blurted it out. "Take me to Madison Street, Tom West's place." As the car pulled up in front of his apartment, her heart pounded in her chest like it was trying to escape. She imagined him opening the door, pulling her into a hug, comforting her, forgiving her, as if everything between them could be erased, like their past could become the present again. It was a weekend, so Tom was home. When he opened the door, they stood there in silence, just staring at each other. The tension was thick, like a fog you could cut with a knife. "Hey, Tom," she whispered, her voice barely audible, laced with hope. "Hey," he replied, but didn't move, didn't make the slightest gesture to invite her in. His eyes were cold, hard, like shards of ice. Christina hesitated, but then pushed forward, stepping inside without his invitation. "We just gonna stand in the doorway?" she tried to joke, hoping it would ease the tension, but Tom didn't smile. He just stepped back, giving her space to pass. Her voice trembled, but she couldn't hold back the flood of emotions any longer. "I love you, Tom." She stared into his eyes, hoping to melt the ice with her words. "I've been in hell this whole time, couldn't find peace. I've realized I made the biggest mistake of my life. I need you, Tom. I can't live without you." Christina reached out to him, hoping he'd pull her into his arms, but Tom took a step back. Her fingers grasped nothing but air. "Say something," she cried out, her voice breaking. "Hit me, yell, do something. Don't just stand there like a statue." Tom finally spoke, his voice dark and steady. "Why are you here, Christina? To keep the show going?" His words cut deep. He stood there, like a cold, stone statue, unmoved, unfeeling. It was like her screams, her emotions bounced off him, leaving no mark. "You don't have a heart. I've been suffering, Tom. And you? You're so damn cold," she shouted, her desperation spilling out. Tom's face remained expressionless, icy. "You've been suffering?" he asked, with a bitter chuckle, and suddenly he walked over to the closet. He pulled out a small bag and tossed it toward her. "Take a look at how you've been suffering." Christina's hands shook as she opened the bag and found photos. Photos of her with Louis. At a fancy restaurant, at a party, in designer boutiques. In every shot, she was smiling, carefree, happy. Why did you keep these?" she stammered, her voice full of confusion and pain. Tom's eyes flickered with cold amusement. "Honestly, I'm not sure. I guess I needed to get you out of my system for good. Unlike you, I was actually serious about us. Tom, please, it was hell without you." A tear rolled down her cheek, but deep down, she knew he wouldn't believe her. Tom sneered. "You really believe that?" He laughed bitterly. "How much money did you make, suffering without me?" Christina sank onto the little bench near the door, her legs barely able to hold her up anymore. Tears streamed down her face uncontrollably now, and she didn't even bother trying to stop them. It wasn't some staged crying fit to get attention. No, these were real tears, bitter with regret and realization. Christina wasn't a bad person. She wasn't. Like a lot of people, she just wanted the good life without putting in all the hard work. She wanted to enjoy the luxuries without the grind. Morals and ethics? She knew what they were, but she didn't care much about them. They were just obstacles on the way to what she thought she deserved. She had always believed she could have it all, that she could bypass the struggle and still come out on top. But now, Sitting here, with her whole world unraveling around her, she finally understood. Nothing in life comes free. Every choice had a cost, and it was time for her to pay. Each sob that racked her body felt like she was letting go of the illusions she'd clung to for so long. Tom stood across the room, watching her fall apart, but his gaze remained icy, detached. There wasn't an ounce of pity left in him, and that realization cut her even deeper. He didn't say anything. The silence was suffocating, thick with unspoken finality. Finally, when her sobs began to fade, Tom broke the silence with his calm, almost indifferent voice. "I'll call you a cab. What's the address?" His tone was so matter-of-fact, like none of this had happened. He wasn't going to fight, he wasn't going to argue. And that hurt more than anything. She realized then that, for him, this was over. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to salvage. Christina muttered the address of her parents' house, feeling the last bit of hope drain out of her as she spoke. She was heading back to where she'd run from, back to the place where disappointment and pain waited for her. But she had no other choice. When the cab pulled up to her childhood home, she couldn't bring herself to step out right away. Gathering what little strength she had left, she took a deep breath and opened the door. As she climbed the steps to the front porch, her heart raced, and when the door finally opened, it felt like time stopped. Her mother took one look at her tear-streaked face and immediately burst into tears herself. She didn't say anything, just wrapped Christina in a tight hug, holding her like she could shield her from the world. Her father stood in the doorway, watching the scene in silence. His jaw tightened, his face hardened, but there was no anger in his eyes, just deep, painful disappointment. He'd said everything he needed to say months ago when she left without a backward glance, ignoring his warnings. Now, words were pointless. Without saying a word, he turned and walked back into the house, leaving Christina standing there, wrapped in her mother's arms, her tears starting to fall again. But these tears felt different. They weren't just tears of pain, but of realization. For the first time, Christina understood that all those warnings, all those things her parents had tried to tell her, weren't just empty words she could ignore. They were life lessons. And here she was, right back at the doorstep where it all began. Life is one long lesson, even if you don't want to learn. Some people take the lessons to heart and grow from them. Some harden themselves, and some let everything go in one ear and out the other. Christina had always seemed like the third kind, someone who didn't learn a thing. But for the first time, she felt something change. Maybe, just maybe, she was finally starting to understand that no lesson is truly ignored, even if you try to run from it.